Hello everyone. On this video we will cover solving equations using quadratic methods. Okay, so first we're going to go over some of the steps, or you can call them guidelines, that you can use to solve these equations. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you want to write it in standard form. That means all variables and constants are on the left side of the equal sign and have it equal to 0. Okay. Second, you want to replace any necessary variable factors temporarily, and I'll show you how to do that on the examples. Okay. Third step, you want to factor the entire equation using the desired method, whether it's the direct method of factoring, the quadratic formula, completing the square. It's completely up to you which method you use. Okay. Fourth step, you want to reverse the temporary variable replacement from step 2. So whatever you replaced in step 2, you want to replace it back. Okay. And your fifth step is you want to solve the equation for the initial variable. So whatever variable you started with in step 1, that's what you want to solve for. Alright. So if you are still writing, please feel free to press pause. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and go to our first example. Okay, so now we're going to look at the example of solving x to the 4th power minus 3x squared minus 4 equals 0 for the variable x. And this is when your leading term is x to the 4th power. Okay, you can also use this when it's x to the 6th power, x to the 8th power, any even exponent. Okay, this method will also work. Okay. So, to go ahead and solve this, first thing you're going to notice is that all variables and constants are already to the left. Okay, so you can skip that first step of putting it in the desired form because it's already there. Okay, so your second step, you're going to replace any necessary variable factors. Okay, so to do that, the one thing we want to notice is that x to the 4th power is equal to x squared squared. Okay, let me see if I can focus that a little bit. That's a little bit better. Okay, so since that's the case, we're going to get our original equation and we're going to rewrite it. So we're going to rewrite as, instead of x to the 4th power, we're going to make it x squared squared minus 3 x squared. And you don't have to put the parentheses there. I just do it as one of my own personal preferences, minus 4 equals 0. Okay, so now once we've done that, we're going to replace the x squared with y. You can pick y, u, r, any variable you want. I just pick y to keep it simple. Okay, so that gives us, instead of x squared squared, that gives us y squared minus, instead of 3x squared, that's 3y minus 4 equals 0. So everywhere there was an x squared, we replaced it with y. Okay, and then we go ahead to our third step, which is to factor. Again, you use any method you want to. I'm just going to go ahead and use the direct method here. Okay, so we have to find two numbers that multiply to equal -4, and those same two numbers add to equal your b, which is -3. Okay. So in this case, your answer would be -4, +1. Okay, -4 times 1 is -4, and -4 plus 1 is -3. So this just gets factored as y minus 4 times y plus 1 equals 0. Okay, now we can go ahead and solve for y. So that means that y minus 4 can equal 0, or y plus 1 can equal 0. So if we add 4 to both sides here, we get y equals 4. Or if we subtract 1 from both sides here, we get y equals -1. Okay, so we've solved for y, but we haven't solved for the variable we started with, which is x, which is why we go back to our fourth step and we replace it back. So here, since we replaced x squared with y, we're going to replace y with x squared. So we're just doing whatever we did in the second step, we're reversing it. Okay, so instead of y equals 4, that's going to become x squared equals 4. And instead of y equals -1, that's going to become x squared equals -1. Okay, and then from there we just go ahead and solve it. Okay, so we go ahead and square root both sides. Square root of x squared equals, remember our plus or minus, square root of 4. Okay, the square and the square root cancels each other out. So we end up with, move that up a little bit, x equals plus or minus 2, or positive or -2. Okay, now on this side, if we square root both sides, we have square root of x squared equals plus or minus the square root of -1. Now remember, the square root of -1 is equal to I, since it's a complex number. So we end up with x equals plus or minus I. Okay, so for this particular problem, your solutions are x is equal to -2, +2, -I, and +I. Okay, so all of those would make your original equation true. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to our next example. If you're still writing, please feel free to press pause. Okay. Let me see. I can erase this a little bit better. There we go. Alright, so for our next example, what if our leading term is a polynomial? So let's say in our polynomial, we have a polynomial. Okay, so what if we want to solve 4t plus 2 squared minus 34t plus 2 plus 224 equals 0. Okay? So, once again, we're going to start with our first step. And we already have everything on the left-hand side equal to 0. So, once again, we can skip that first step. Okay? So, now we can go right to our second step, where we replace. Now, on this one, you're going to notice that you can just replace 4t plus 2 with, you can replace it with x, you can replace it with y, it doesn't matter at all. Okay? Now we'll replace it with y. Okay? Now once you do that, you'll end up with, instead of 4t plus 2 squared, you'll end up with y squared. And instead of minus 30 times 4t plus 2, it'll be minus 30y plus 224 equals 0. Okay, so we've gone ahead and replaced our polynomial factor. And now we just go ahead and solve that. Okay, so again, we can use any method we want to solve it. I'm going to go ahead and use a quadratic formula. Again, that's just my method on this one. You can use whatever method you like. Okay, so remember, for the quadratic formula, y equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so you can see here your a is equal to 1, your b is equal to negative 30, and your c is equal to 224. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and replace those. Okay, so negative b, that's negative 30. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's negative 30 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 224, all over 2a, which is 2 times 1. Alright. So negative 30, that's just positive 30. So 30 plus or minus, I'll just put the y back here. The square root, negative 30 squared, negative 30 times negative 30 is positive 900. Minus 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 224 is 896. All over 2. Okay, so we're just going to continue with y is equal to 30 plus or minus 900 minus 896 is 4. So, alright, square root of 4 over 2. Which, if we keep going, that's 30 plus or minus square root of 4 is 2. So 30 plus or minus 2 over 2. Okay, so that's our end of our y. So what this tells us is that y is equal to 30 plus 2 over 2, and y is equal to 30 minus 2 over 2. Okay, so 30 plus 2 is 32. So you have 32 divided by 2, which is 16. So y equals 16. And 30 minus 2 is 28. 28 divided by 2 is 14. So y can also equal 14. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and actually, since we didn't factor, this would have been our third step here. So we didn't factor, but used quadratic formula. Okay, but either way, we got our answer. Okay, now for step 4, we replace it back. So we replace y with 4t plus 2. Okay, so instead of y equals 16, that will become 4t plus 2 equals 16. And instead of y equals 14, that will become 4t plus 2 equals 14. Okay, so now we just go ahead and solve for t. So if we go ahead and subtract 2 from both sides, we have 4t equals 14. Divide both sides by 4. We end up with t equals 14 over 4, which simplifies to t equals 7 over 2. Since 2 can divide both of those values. Okay, so now here, if we go ahead and subtract 2 from both sides, we get 4t equals 12. So we divide both sides by 4. We end up with t equals 12 divided by 4 is 3. Okay. So your solutions are t equals 7 over 2 and t equals 3. Alright. Okay, so if you're still writing, please feel free to press pause. We're going to go ahead to the next example. Alright, so for our next example, this is what you do when your exponent is a fraction. Okay, so we're going to solve 2 times m to the 2/3 power minus 2 equals 3 times m to the 1/3 power. Okay, so yeah, this exponent is 2/3 and this exponent is 1 to the 3rd power. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is put into standard form. Okay, so we're going to subtract 3m to the 1/3 power from both sides. Okay, so that's 2m to the 2/3 power minus 3m to the 1/3 power, since we subtracted from both sides, minus 2 equals 0. Okay, so our second step is when we're going to do our replacing. Alright, now to do that, before we can do anything else, you want to notice that m to the 2/3 power is equal to m to the 1/3 power squared. Okay, so I'm going to take you back to our first example. I'm going to show you a little bit of a shortcut. Okay, so if you notice your middle term, this is x squared, this is x to the 4th power. So we notice that our middle term variable is our first term variable squared, or the other way around. Our first term variable is our middle term variable squared. Okay, so here we have x to the 4th is just x squared squared. On this one, you have m to the 2/3 power is m to the 1/3 power squared. Okay, oh, get that erased there. So that's just a little shortcut to help you figure out how to rewrite it. Alright, so let's go to finish up our second step. So once we do that, we go ahead and replace it. So instead of 2m to the 2/3 power, we have 2 times m to the 1/3 power squared minus 3 times m to the 1/3 power minus 2 equals 0. And let me straighten up that 3 a little bit. There we go. Alright. And from here, we're going to replace m to the 1/3. And again, you can use x, you can use y, you can use whatever variable you want. I just use y as my go-to. Give me one less thing to have to think about. Okay, so that gives us 2y squared minus 3y minus 2 equals 0. Alright, so for our third step, we're not factoring, so what you might want to do is change the third step from factor to solve the entire equation, because we're not factoring on this one. And I'll go back to that one real quick. Well, after I'm done with this. Okay, so you can use the quadratic formula again, or you can use the a times c method. Either one of those would work, but the a times c method is a lot longer. So the quadratic formula for this one would be quicker. Okay. So again, a is equal to 2, b is equal to -3, and c is equal to -2. So using the quadratic formula, we have y is equal to -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so that is equal to -b is -3 plus or minus the square root of -3 squared minus 4 times a times c, so that's 2 times -2 all over 2a, which is 2 times 2. Let's straighten that out a little bit. There we go. Alright, so let's go ahead and simplify this a little bit. We have -3, so that's +3, plus or minus square root of -3 squared, so that's square root of 9, minus 4 times 8 is 8, well 4 times 2 is 8, times -2 is -16, so that's minus negative, which is plus. So plus 16 over 2 times 2, which is 4. which becomes 3 plus or minus square root of 9 plus 16 is 25. So square root of 25 is equal to 5 all over 4. Okay, so this lets us know that y can equal 3 plus 5 over 4, or y can equal 3 minus 5 over 4. Okay, 3 plus 5 is 8. So you have 8 divided by 4, which is 2. So y is equal to 2. You have 3 minus 5 is negative 2. So that's y equals negative 2 over 4, which simplifies to negative 1/2. Okay, so that brings us to our fourth step. Where we replace from step 2. So since we replaced m to the 1/3 power with y, we're going to replace y with m to the 1/3 power. Okay, so we have m to the 1/3 power equals 2. And for this one, we have m to the 1/3 power equals negative 1/2. Okay, now with this, we'll bring that up a little bit. You want to remember one thing. So the same way you have the square root property, m to the 1/3 power raised to the 3rd power is equal to m, because the exponents cancel each other out, because it's m to the 1/3 times 3 power, which is just m. Okay, so what we're going to do here, we're going to raise both sides to the 3rd power. Because remember, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So you have m to the 1/3 power raised to the 3rd power equals 2 to the 3rd power. Now, if you had it to the 1/4 power, you'd raise both sides to the 4th power. Or 1/5, you'd raise both sides to the 5th power, etc., and so on. These two cancel each other out. So we end up with m equals 2 to the 3rd power, which is 8. And here we do the same thing. We have m to the 1/3 power raised to the 3rd power equals negative 1/2 to the 3rd power. And again, those two cancel out. So we end up with m equals negative 1/2 to the 3rd power is negative 1/8. So these are your solutions. And if you like, you can check them by plugging them into your original equation, but you don't have to. Alright. So again, if you're still writing, please feel free to press pause. But we're going to go ahead and go to our next example. Okay, so what if your exponent is negative? Okay, so for example, if you wanted to solve 15a to the negative 2 minus 8a to the negative 1 plus 1 equals 0 for the variable a. Alright, so once again, we can go ahead and skip our first step because everything is already moved to the left-hand side and is equal to 0. So we move to our second step where we replace our variable. So to do that, we have to notice one thing, that a to the negative 2 power. Now if you want, you can make that a to the negative 1 squared, or you can make it 1 over a squared, and a to the negative 1 power is equal to 1 over a. Okay. Now a 1 over a squared, we can actually rewrite that as 1 over a squared. Okay, so we go ahead and rewrite this entire equation. So that gives us 15 times 1 over a squared minus 8 times 1 over a plus 1 equals 0. And again, if you wanted to, you could have made that a to the negative 1 power squared, and it would have given you, ended up with the same answer. It's just a matter of preference to write this way. Okay. So again, we're going to replace both of these. 1 over a with y. Okay, so that gives us 15 y squared minus 8y plus 1 equals 0. Let me straighten up that 2 a little bit. There we go. Okay, which brings us to our third step where we can factor. Or in this case, again, instead of using the method of factoring or using the a times c method, I'm going to go ahead and use the quadratic formula. Again, it's a lot quicker than the a times c method. Okay, so you can use the quadratic formula. And again, we have y equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so that's going to equal, remember a is equal to 15, b is equal to negative 8, oh, sorry to have it so close, c is equal to 1, probably should have did that first. There we go. So if we go ahead and replace it, we end up with y equals negative b, so that's negative 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's negative 8 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, so 2 times 15. Okay, so let's go ahead and simplify everything here. So negative 8 is positive 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 squared is 64 minus 4 times 15 is 60 all over 2 times 15, which is 30. So that would give us 8 plus or minus 64 minus 60 is 4. So the square root of 4 is equal to 2 all over 30. So this lets us know that y is equal to 8 plus 2 over 30, or y is equal to 8 minus 2 over 30. Okay, so 8 plus 2 is 10. 10 divided by 30 is 1/3 once you simplify it. So y is equal to 1/3. And 8 minus 2 is 6. I'll move that up a little bit. 6 divided by 30 simplifies to 1/5. Which brings us to our fourth step. Oh, bring that up a little bit. There we go. Where we replace back. So we replace y with 1 over a. Okay, so this will become 1 over a equals 1/3. And this will become 1 over a equals 1 over 5. Okay. Now actually we can go ahead and just use cross multiplication for both of these. A times 1 is equal to a. 3 times 1 is equal to 3. Again, a times 1 is equal to a. 5 times 1 is equal to 5. So these are your solutions. Oh, bring that up some. Alright. Okay, so again, if you're still writing, by all means, feel free to press pause. But we're going to go ahead and go to our next example. Erase that little dot there. That'll probably end up bugging me if I didn't erase that. Alright. So, what if your lead coefficient is just a regular variable and you have a square root in there? Okay, so what if we wanted to solve x minus 9 square root of x plus 20 equals 0 for x? Alright. So we're going to solve it, and again, everything is on the left hand side and it equals to 0, so we can skip our first step. Okay, so we can go right to our second step, where we replace. Okay, so in order to replace, you have to notice something. So notice, remember our middle term is square root of x. So we notice that x can equal that middle term squared. So it equals square root of x squared. Okay. So once we get our notice out the way, we can go ahead and rewrite it. So instead of x, we can make that square root of x squared. Minus 9 square root of x. And again, you don't have to put the parentheses if you don't want to. On the middle term, I just do it out of personal preference. Plus 20 equals 0. Okay, so just like before, we replace square root of x with y, or u, or v, or r, whatever variable you like. Again, I just pick y because it gives me one less thing to think about. So I always pick the same variable. Okay, so that now becomes y squared minus 9y plus 20 equals 0. Okay, where we go to our third step where we can go ahead and factor. Now this one, we don't really need the quadratic formula. We can go ahead and factor that using the direct method. Okay, where we find two numbers that multiply to equal your C value, and those same two numbers add to equal your B value, which is -9. Okay, now in this case, -4 and -5 works. Because -4 times -5 equals +20, and -4 plus -5 equals -9. So this will actually factor to become y minus 4 times y minus 5 equals 0. Okay, so we can go ahead and set both of those to 0. That means y minus 4 equals 0, or y minus 5 equals 0. We go ahead and add 4 to both sides, we get y equals 4. And if we add 5 to both sides here, we get y equals 5. Okay. That's why with that third step, you factor it however you like or solve it however you like. If you want to use the correct method, quadratic formula, whichever method is easiest for you. Okay, so now we go ahead to our fourth step, where we replace it back. So we replace y with square root of x. Okay, so this will become square root of x equals 4, and this will become square root of x equals 5. Okay, so once again, we know that square root of x squared is equal to x. So we can go ahead and just square both sides, because whenever you do the left side, you have to do it to the right. So square root of x squared equals 4 squared. Let me kind of separate that a little. The square and the square root cancels out. So you end up with x equals 16. Same thing here. We have square root of x squared equals 5 squared. The square and the square root cancels out. So that leaves us with x equals 5 squared is 25. Okay, so these are your solutions. Okay, so after a while with practice, these steps will be second nature. Okay, so hopefully these examples and steps made sense, and I will see you on the next video.